The test drive series was in a bit of a mess in the 1990s and early 2000s. You had test drive 4, 5 and 6, which were pretty much all the same with very few and very minor differences between them. So much so that I only reviewed the 4th game, and it wasn't good at all. Test Drive 4 was the only game of its kind in 1997, but other racing games which were a lot better, such as Gran Turismo and Need for Speed High Stakes, were released a few months after, and that meant Test Drive 5 and 6 were behind in a lot of ways. Those two games had nothing going for them. You also had the off-road test drive games as well. These games were so different to anything else on the market, but they also had a lot of issues. The draw distance in Test Drive Off-Road was terrible, and that made the game unplayable. That was fixed in the 2nd and 3rd off-road test drive games, but other issues appeared. The chase camera was fixed to a certain point on the car, so every bump was shown through the camera. This wouldn't have been so bad if there weren't so many bumps, but it was an off-roading game, so there were bumps. And a lot of them. This was so bad that it used to give me migraines after about half an hour of playing. And then you have all of the games on the 6th generation consoles, which I'm not going to go into too much detail on, as they're all pretty much forgotten about and I don't have any of them, but they were not really that well received by critics at all. By 2004, the Test Drive series was on its last legs, as there wasn't anything new with the games, and even if there was something different about them, then that would have been overshadowed by how bad the rest of the game was. The IP owner at the time, which was Atari, knew this and released Test Drive Unlimited in 2006. The Xbox 360 and the PSP versions of the game were developed by Eden Games, and the PlayStation 2 and PSP versions were developed by Atari Melbourne House. I'm reviewing the Xbox 360 version of the game. There are quite a few differences between the games made by the two developers, which I'll talk about near the end of the review. The idea of the game is to build up a collection of cars, bikes and real estate all over the Hawaiian island of Oahu. You start the game by renting a car and driving to the real estate agent to buy a cheap house with a 4-car garage, and then to the car dealership to buy a cheap low-powered car. I bought an Audi A3. As you go through the game, you have to do events of all sorts, driving on every road on the island and earning money. There are a lot of events and event types in the game, and it will take you many hours to get through them all. It took so long that I didn't record all of it, just so I could save a little bit of hard drive space. You are mainly doing events that are restricted by what group your car or bike is in, and a lot of the events that are unlocked at one time are for cars and bikes which are in the same group. So you end up driving the same car or bike for hours at a time, especially near the beginning of the game. Well, only cars, as you have to drive past every car dealership to unlock bikes, which I don't think was a good idea because that means the game was only for people who like cars and not necessarily bikes. And so straight away, the target audience is a lot smaller than it could have been because of the way that the game is set up. You have standard races, time trials, speed traps, elimination races and a few others. So there are a lot of events to do. So much so that it took me 10 hours to complete only 25% of the game. To make a lot of money in the game, it is best to do the delivery missions. These missions will have you delivering cars and packages. The package delivery missions are a bit of a pain as your car needs to meet the certain requirements. But you can drive up to any car delivery mission in any car, drive the car that needs to be delivered, and then make over $150,000 depending on the mission and if you crash or not. You need to drive past these missions to be able to unlock them, so you can just look up the locations online and then make millions within a few hours. You've also got the Hitchhiker Missions as well. In these missions you have to go from point A to B in a certain amount of time. These missions also have requirements. What I find weird about this is that if you need a lift somewhere, then you won't care what car turns up, just as long as it doesn't say free candy on the side. You get coupons for completing these missions, which can be spent on new clothes, as there's quite a lot of character customization in the game. There are quite a few places where you can buy clothes, and there are different things to buy in each shop, as they are actually licensed by the fashion labels, such as Ben Sherman and Echo. You can also customize your character's face. You can change the way that the eyes, nose, ears, mouth, chin, jaw, and hair look. It's not like in the second game where you have to go to the plastic surgeon to have all of that done. You do it all in your walk-in closet in one of your houses, which is a little bit weird. The physics are alright. The game feels more realistic than Need for Speed Most Wanted, which was the most current Need for Speed game at the time, but is a lot more arcadey than Gran Turismo 4. I like the physics, but there are a few things that I don't like, such as the heavy gravity, and the fact that rear-wheel drive cars get a bit oversteery at times, even if I'm not giving it that much throttle. And then we get to the thing that gives the game its identity and what made it unique to all of the other racing games that came out in the early to mid 2000s, and that would be the map. As I've already stated, the game is set on the Hawaiian island of Oahu, which is 617 square miles of land. That is a little bit bigger than the size of London, but only by 10 square miles. It is still one of the biggest maps ever in a video game, even after 14 years of its release. A lot of it you can't actually drive on, as there's a lot of mountains, but you can drive on more than 1,000 miles of road. There are a few things that I don't like about the map. A lot of the buildings have just been placed on grass, and that makes the game look unfinished, and some of the roads have steep elevation changes and hills that negatively affect the way that you drive. But overall, I do like the map. I also like the vehicle list. The game has 150 cars and bikes, which is including DLC. There are a lot of manufacturers and cars that didn't really appear in other racing games at the time, such as the Farbond GTS, the Scari KZ1, and the Cadillac XLR-V. There's not that many bikes in the game at all. I think there might only be 7 overall, maybe 8. My point is that the game was clearly meant for players who like cars and not people who like bikes, and so there really wasn't a reason to add bikes in the first place. The car list isn't very varied, as most of the cars are either supercars, hypercars, and sports cars. There are a few cars that aren't that expensive, but not many. And so overall, I do like the car list, but I think the lack of variety is disappointing. And so is the upgrading and customization. There are only 2 things to do with the customization in Test Drive Unlimited, which isn't good, but it is better than a lot of other racing games. You have a choice of wheels when you buy a new car, as the game has a lot of wheels that the car was sold with, and you can choose the colour of the interior as well, which is good. There is also a paint shop where you can paint the car whatever colour you want. But that is where my praise for this aspect of the game ends, because I'm going to talk about the upgrading. To upgrade your car, you have to take it to a tuning shop, and you can't just upgrade some parts. The game will upgrade the car for you, and it doesn't tell you what parts are upgraded. Instead, there are 3 tiers of preset upgrades, which does kind of take the fun out of it. And I'm glad that most developers have moved away from this kind of thing. You can play Test Drive Unlimited on PC and the Xbox 360, but as I've already stated, it was also released on the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation Portable, but there are a lot of differences which make those versions a lot worse. There are only automatic transmissions in the game, there was no character customization, manufacturers such as Ferrari, Maserati and Lexus were missing as well, as were all bikes, and a few other things which I won't go into, otherwise this review will be more like a list of missing content. It is that bad. Even though this entire review was for the Xbox 360 version of the game, it isn't the one that I'm going to recommend. I recommend the PC version instead, as you can add mods to improve the car list and customization. There is a mod called Test Drive Unlimited Platinum which adds hundreds of cars, and even though it takes up many gigabytes of storage, it is worth it. Overall, Test Drive Unlimited is a good game, even if it does have a lot of issues, and it was the only game of its type at the time. So there would have been issues that the developers probably couldn't fix on time. I enjoyed the game a lot, and that is kind of all that matters really. But there could have been more cars and bikes and a wider variety of cars. That was my main issue with the game. This has been my review of Test Drive Unlimited on the Xbox 360. If you liked this review, then please give it a like. If you didn't, then give it a dislike. And if you want to see more, then please consider subscribing and joining the Discord server linked in the description. Goodbye.